Maya Richardson had never begged anyone for anything in her entire life. But today was different. Today, she stood outside the Grand Regency Hotel with tears running down her face, waiting for a miracle she didn't even believe in. The morning had started like any other terrible morning in the past 3 months. She'd woken up at 5, checked on her grandmother Dorothy, given her medication, and headed to work at the hospital. But this morning, Dr. Peterson had pulled her aside with that look on his face. The look that said everything without saying anything at all. "A few days, Maya. Maybe a week if we're lucky," he'd said quietly. "I'm so sorry." Dorothy had raised Maya since she was 7 years old. When Maya's parents died in that car accident, it was Dorothy who held her through the nightmares. It was Dorothy who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. It was Dorothy who sat in the front row when Maya graduated nursing school, crying tears of joy and pride. And now Dorothy was dying. Lung cancer, stage 4. The woman who had given Maya everything was slipping away, and there was nothing Maya could do to stop it, except for one thing. One impossible, crazy thing. Yesterday, Dorothy had grabbed Maya's hand with surprising strength. Her voice was weak, but her words were clear. "Baby, I need to see you settled before I go. I need to know you won't be alone. Please, Maya, let me see you married. Let me have that peace." Maya had tried to explain that she couldn't just snap her fingers and produce a husband. She'd been single for 2 years, ever since her ex-boyfriend left when the medical bills started piling up. But Dorothy wouldn't hear it. "I don't care if it's real or not," Dorothy had whispered. "I just need to see it. Please, baby. It's all I'm asking for." So here Maya stood, outside the fanciest hotel in the city, feeling like she'd lost her mind. She'd tried everything else first. She'd called old friends, distant cousins, even that guy from her nursing program, who'd always had a crush on her. Nobody could help. Nobody wanted to pretend to be someone's husband, even for a dying woman's last wish. Then she'd seen the news this morning. Alexander Stone, the billionaire tech genius, was in town for some business conference. His picture was everywhere, and Maya had thought, in her desperate, sleepless state, that maybe a man who had everything would understand what it meant to have nothing left to lose. She knew it was insane. She knew he'd probably call security. But she had to try. For Dorothy. For the woman who'd sacrificed everything for her. A black limousine pulled up to the hotel entrance. Maya's heart started pounding. She wiped her face, trying to look less like a crazy person, but the tears kept coming. She couldn't stop them anymore. The driver opened the door, and Alexander Stone stepped out. He was taller than she'd expected, wearing a dark suit that probably cost more than her car. His face was serious, almost cold, as he checked his phone. This was a man who lived in a completely different world. A world where people didn't stand outside hotels crying and begging strangers for help. Maya's courage almost failed her. But then she thought of Dorothy's face, the way hope had lit up her tired eyes when she'd asked about the wedding. Maya took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Stone?" He looked up, his expression annoyed. "I'm not doing autographs or please," Maya interrupted, her voice breaking. "I need your help. I know this sounds crazy, but please just hear me out." Something in her voice made him stop. Maybe it was the raw desperation. Maybe it was the tears she couldn't control. His assistant, a thin man with glasses, tried to step between them. "Sir, we're already late for the meeting," the assistant said firmly, but Alexander held up his hand. He was looking at Maya now, really looking at her. "You have 1 minute," he said. The words tumbled out of Maya in a rush. She told him about Dorothy, about the cancer, about the days or maybe hours they had left. She told him about the one last wish of a dying woman who'd given up everything for her. And then feeling like she might throw up from embarrassment and grief. She said the words she'd never imagined saying to anyone. I need you to pretend to be my husband for one day. Just one day. So my grandmother can see me married before she dies. I know it's insane. I know you don't know me. But I've tried everything else, and I'm out of options. Please, I'm begging you. Alexander stared at her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Maya could see his assistant shaking his head, probably thinking she was some kind of scammer or crazy person. Other people were starting to stare. A security guard was walking toward them. This is ridiculous, the assistant muttered. Sir, we really need to go. But Alexander kept looking at Maya. She didn't know what he saw in her face. Maybe he saw the truth. Maybe he saw someone who'd reached the absolute end of their rope. Maybe he saw something that reminded him of his own humanity, buried under years of business deals and boardrooms. Where is she? Alexander asked quietly. Maya blinked. What? Your grandmother? Where is she? St. Catherine's Hospital. Room 412. But what's your name? Maya Richardson. Alexander turned to his assistant. Cancel my afternoon meetings. The assistant's mouth dropped open. Sir, you can't be serious. The investors are flying in from London. The merger, reschedule it, Alexander said firmly. He looked back at Maya. I'll do it. One day. For your grandmother. Maya felt like her legs might give out. She grabbed the side of a planter to steady herself. You? You will, really? I'll have my driver take you home to change. Give him the hospital address. I'll meet you there in 2 hours. He paused, and something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. We should probably know a few things about each other before we pretend to be married. Thank you, Maya whispered, and then louder, thank you so much. You have no idea what this means. I'll pay you back somehow. I don't know how, but I will. Alexander held up his hand again. Consider it a favor. No strings attached. He turned to walk into the hotel, then stopped and looked back. 2 hours, Maya. Don't be late. As the limousine pulled away from the curb to take her home, Maya sat in the back seat, feeling like she just stepped into some kind of dream. Or maybe a nightmare. She didn't know this man. He didn't know her. What had she just done? What had she gotten them both into? But when she thought of Dorothy's face, of the hope and peace this might bring her in her final days, Maya knew she'd do it again. She'd do anything for the woman who'd given her everything. She just hoped this billionaire, stranger, wouldn't regret his moment of kindness. And somewhere, in a small voice she tried to ignore, she hoped she wouldn't regret it either. Maya sat in the hospital parking lot, watching Alexander Stone's sleek car pull into a visitor spot. Her hands were shaking. She'd changed into the nicest dress she owned, a simple navy blue one she usually saved for church. It felt wrong somehow, getting dressed up to lie to her dying grandmother. But Dorothy had asked for this. Begged for it, really. Alexander stepped out of his car, and Maya noticed he'd changed too. Gone was the intimidating business suit. Now he wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater. He looked more human this way. Less like a billionaire, and more like someone who might actually be in her life. He walked over to her car, and she got out to meet him. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, two strangers about to pretend they were in love. We should probably talk before we go up there, Alexander said. Get our story straight. Maya nodded. Her throat felt tight. There's a coffee shop across the street. Let's just walk around the parking lot. She's waiting for you. For us. They started walking slowly around the lot. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, even though it wasn't that cold. She couldn't believe this was actually happening. So, Alexander said, his hands in his pockets. How did we meet? Maya had been thinking about this all morning. The hospital? I work here. Maybe you came in for something, and we met? He shook his head. Too clinical. People remember love stories because they're unexpected. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. What if we met at a bookstore? Something simple, real. I love bookstores, Maya said softly. There's one downtown I go to when I need to clear my head. Barrett's Books. Perfect. I was there looking for a gift. You were there on your break. I asked you for a recommendation. He looked at her. What would you have recommended? Despite everything, Maya almost smiled. Depends. What kind of person are you? Apparently the kind who pretends to be married to a stranger to help her grandmother, he said. And there was something in his voice that wasn't quite a joke. Then I'd recommend something about finding humanity in unexpected places, Maya said. They worked out the details. 6 months they'd been together. He'd asked her out that same day in the bookstore. They'd kept it quiet because of his public profile. He'd proposed last month, something simple and private. They were planning a small wedding, but wanted Dorothy to be there, so they'd moved everything up. Will she believe it? Alexander asked as they headed toward the hospital entrance. She wants to believe it, Maya said quietly. That's all that matters now. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like it took forever and no time at all. Maya's heart was pounding so hard, she thought Alexander must be able to hear it. When they reached room 412, she paused with her hand on the door. Last chance to back out, she whispered. Alexander looked at her steadily. I don't back out of my commitments, even the strange ones. Dorothy was awake when they entered. She looked so small in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes. But her eyes lit up when she saw them together, and Maya felt her heart break a little more. Grandma, this is Alexander, Maya said, moving to the bedside and taking Dorothy's hand. Alexander came to stand beside her, and she felt his presence like a solid wall of support. Alexander, Dorothy repeated, her voice weak but warm. The man who stole my baby's heart? Actually, I think she stole mine, Alexander said. And the way he looked at Maya in that moment almost made her believe it herself. Dorothy smiled. The kind of smile that reached her eyes, despite the pain medication and exhaustion. Sit down, both of you. I want to hear everything. How did you meet? When did you know? They told her the bookstore story. Alexander was surprisingly good at this, adding little details that made it feel real. The way Maya had been holding 3 books and trying to pick just one. How he'd offered to buy all 3 for her, and she'd refused. How he'd accidentally run into her the next day at the same bookstore. She made me work for it, Alexander said, and there was something genuine in his voice. 3 weeks before she'd agreed to dinner. Maya found herself playing along naturally. I thought he was just some rich guy looking for entertainment. I didn't realize he was serious. When did you realize? Dorothy asked, her eyes moving between them. Maya looked at Alexander, and he looked back at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alexander said, when I brought her soup at 2 in the morning because she texted me that she'd had a hard shift. I drove across town, and when she opened her door, looking exhausted and beautiful, I just knew. This was the person I wanted to bring soup to for the rest of my life. Dorothy laughed softly, then coughed. Maya grabbed the water cup, helping her grandmother drink. Alexander stood, looking uncomfortable, like he wanted to help but didn't know how. Over the next hour, they sat with Dorothy. She drifted in and out of sleep, but when she was awake, she asked questions. What did Alexander do? Where did he grow up? What were their plans? Alexander answered honestly about his work, but Maya noticed he made it sound smaller than it was. He talked about his company like it was a regular business, not an empire worth billions. He told Dorothy about growing up in Boston, about his parents who were always working. And Maya heard the loneliness underneath those words. A nurse came in to check vitals, someone Maya knew from working here. Teresa gave her a knowing look and a small smile before leaving. The lie was spreading now, becoming more real with every person who witnessed it. When Dorothy fell asleep again, Maya and Alexander stepped out into the hallway. Maya leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. "You're good at this," she said quietly. "The lying." "I'm good at telling people what they want to hear," Alexander corrected. "It's different." He looked through the window at Dorothy's sleeping form. "How long have you been taking care of her?" 3 years since the diagnosis. But really, my whole life. She raised me after my parents died. That's why you're a nurse, Alexander said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded. I was in medical school, actually. Halfway through. But when she got sick, the bills started piling up. I had to choose between school and making sure she got the care she needed. She shrugged, trying to make it sound like it didn't hurt. Easy choice, really? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was different somehow, softer. You gave up your dream for her. She gave up everything for me first. I was just returning the favor. Maya pushed off from the wall. I should get back in there. She might wake up, and I don't want her be alone. Maya, Alexander said, and she turned back. What you did, what you're doing for her, that's not common. Most people don't love like that anymore. Something in his eyes made Maya think he was talking about more than just her and Dorothy. She wondered what his life was like, surrounded by wealth, but talking about love like it was a rare thing. They went back into the room together. Dorothy woke up about 20 minutes later, and her face went serious. I have something to ask you both, she said. Maya took her hand. Anything, Grandma. I want to see you married. Really married. Here, in this room. Dorothy's grip tightened weakly on Maya's hand. I know it's not conventional. I know it's rushed. But baby, I don't have time for conventional anymore. Please, let me see it. Let me be there for that moment. Maya's breath caught. This was more than she'd expected. She'd thought a fake engagement would be enough, but Dorothy wanted to witness a ceremony. She looked at Alexander, panic in her eyes, but Alexander stepped forward and took Dorothy's other hand. We'd be honored to have you there, ma'am. We were planning something small anyway. This just makes it more meaningful. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. Really? You'd do that? For Maya, I'd do anything, Alexander said, and the scary thing was how much it sounded like the truth. After they left the hospital that evening, Maya walked Alexander to his car. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. You don't have to do this, Maya said. This ceremony thing. That's asking too much. Alexander opened his car door, but didn't get in. I said I'd help. I meant it. He paused. Tomorrow, then. We'll give her a wedding. As he drove away, Maya stood in the parking lot, wondering how her life had turned into something so strange and impossible. A week ago, her biggest worry was picking up extra shifts. Now she was planning a fake wedding to a billionaire, so her grandmother could die in peace. But when she went back upstairs to sit with Dorothy through the night, and saw the peaceful smile on her grandmother's sleeping face, Maya knew she'd made the right choice. Even if it was built on a lie, the love behind it was completely real. The hospital chaplain arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Maya had spent the morning making Dorothy comfortable, brushing her hair, helping her into the soft pink bed jacket she'd been saving for a special occasion. This wasn't how either of them had imagined this day, but Dorothy's smile said it was perfect anyway. Alexander showed up 30 minutes early, carrying a small bouquet of white roses. He'd also brought a photographer, though he'd asked the man to stay outside until they were ready. I thought she might want pictures, Alexander explained quietly to Maya in the hallway. Something you can keep. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so focused on just making this happen that she hadn't thought about after. About having proof that this moment existed. Thank you, she whispered. Alexander had dressed in a dark suit again, but this time he wore it differently. Less like armor and more like someone actually going to his wedding. Maya wore the same navy dress from yesterday. It was all she had, and she told herself it didn't matter. But Alexander noticed. You look beautiful, he said, and something in his voice made her believe he meant it. Inside the room, Dorothy was propped up on pillows, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion written on her face. Two nurses who'd become Maya's friends over the past months stood in the corner as witnesses. Teresa winked at Maya, and the other nurse, an older woman named Ruth, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The chaplain was a kind-faced man in his 60s, who'd done dozens of these bedside ceremonies. He didn't ask questions about why or how fast this was happening. He'd learned long ago that at the end of life, nothing followed the usual rules. Are we ready? He asked gently. Dorothy nodded. Alexander and Maya stood beside her bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. The chaplain opened his small prayer book and began. The words were simple, traditional. Maya had heard them at other weddings and never thought much about them. But standing here, holding Dorothy's hand on one side and feeling Alexander's presence on the other, every word seemed to carry weight. Do you? Alexander, take Maya to be your wife, to have and to hold from this day forward. For better or for worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish. Till death do you part? Alexander turned to face Maya fully. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there she couldn't quite name. I do, he said, and his voice was steady and sure. Then it was Maya's turn. She looked up at Alexander, this stranger who'd become something else entirely in just 2 days. A man who'd dropped everything to stand in a hospital room and speak vows for a dying woman's peace of mind. I do, Maya said, and meant it more than she'd expected to. The chaplain smiled. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He paused, glancing at Dorothy's happy face. You may kiss your bride. Maya's heart stopped. They hadn't practiced this part. She saw Alexander's brief moment of hesitation. Then he leaned down and kissed her forehead, gentle and tender. It was perfect, appropriate, the kind of kiss that spoke of affection and respect rather than passion. But Maya felt it all the way down to her toes anyway. Dorothy clapped weakly, tears streaming down her face. My baby's married, she whispered. My beautiful baby. The photographer came in and took a few pictures. One of Maya and Alexander standing together. One with Dorothy between them, all three holding hands. One of just Maya and Dorothy, grandmother and granddaughter, sharing a moment that would be their last celebration together. After the ceremony, the chaplain and photographer left. The nurses hugged Maya and slipped out quietly. And suddenly, it was just the three of them in the room, the weight of what they'd done settling over everything. Tell me about your plans, Dorothy said, her voice tired but content. Where will you live? What kind of life will you build together? Maya started to answer, but Alexander spoke first. We haven't figured out all the details yet, he said, pulling a chair close to the bed and sitting down. But I know I want to support Maya's dreams. She told me she had to leave medical school. I'd like to see her go back, if that's what she wants. Maya stared at him. They'd never discussed this. Dorothy squeezed Maya's hand. She's brilliant, you know. Top of her class. She gave it all up for me. A tear slid down her cheek. I never wanted her to do that. I know, Alexander said softly. But that's who she is. That's one of the things that makes her extraordinary. Over the next few hours, they sat with Dorothy. She drifted in and out of sleep, but when she was awake, she seemed lighter somehow. At peace, Maya realized that this was what she'd needed. Not the ceremony itself, but the knowledge that Maya wouldn't be alone. That someone would be there to hold her hand through whatever came next, even if it was all pretend around dinner time. A nurse brought food for Dorothy, though she could barely eat. Maya helped her with a few bites of soup, while Alexander stepped out to make some phone calls. When he came back, he was carrying takeout bags from a nearby restaurant. "I figured you hadn't eaten," he said to Maya. "Hospital cafeteria food is terrible." They ate together in the room, quiet and comfortable. Dorothy watched them with satisfied eyes before falling asleep again. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. "You should go home," Maya said eventually. "Get some rest. You've done more than enough." Alexander looked at Dorothy's sleeping form, then back at Maya. "What about you?" "I'm staying. I always stay." "Then I'm staying too." "Alexander, you don't have to. We're married now, remember?" he said with a slight smile. "Even if it's pretend, I should probably start acting like a husband. And I don't think husbands leave their wives to sleep in hospital chairs alone." So he stayed. They pushed 2 uncomfortable chairs together and took turns dozing off while the other kept watch. Around midnight, Maya woke to find Alexander sitting by Dorothy's bed, just watching her breathe. There was something in his expression that looked like grief, though Maya couldn't understand why. "Can't sleep?" she whispered. He shook his head. "I was just thinking about how much love there is in this room. Real, genuine love. The kind that sacrifices everything and asks for nothing back." He looked at Maya. "I grew up with everything money could buy, but I never had this." "Had what?" "Someone who would give up their dreams for me. Someone who would love me enough to sit in an uncomfortable chair all night just to be near me when I needed them." Maya's throat tightened. "Your parents loved their work, loved success. I'm not sure they ever really loved me. Not like this." He gestured to the room, to Dorothy, to everything Maya had built with her grandmother. "I was raised by nannies and sent to boarding schools. My parents attended exactly 3 of my school events in 12 years. They missed my college graduation for a business conference." "I'm sorry," Maya said softly. "Don't be. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because being here, seeing what you have with her, it's making me realize what I've been missing." He was quiet for a moment. "I've spent 15 years building a company, making billions, earning respect and fear from everyone around me. But I can't remember the last time anyone looked at me the way Dorothy looks at you." Maya moved to sit beside him. Their shoulders touched, just like during the ceremony. "You did something extraordinary for us," she said. "You gave her peace. That's not nothing, Alexander." He turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the hospital room, his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen them. "It doesn't feel like enough." "It's everything," Maya assured him. They sat together in comfortable silence after that. At some point, Maya's head drifted onto his shoulder, and Alexander didn't move away. When the sunrise started painting the windows pink and gold, they were still sitting like that, 2 people who'd been strangers 3 days ago, now connected by something neither of them quite understood. Dorothy woke up with the sunrise. She looked at them sitting together and smiled that knowing smile. "You 2 really do love each other, don't you?" she said. Maya started to protest, to explain it was just exhaustion, just the long night catching up with them. But Alexander spoke first. "Yes," he said simply. "We do." And the terrifying thing was, Maya couldn't tell if he was still pretending or if something had shifted in the night. She couldn't tell if her own heart was pounding from fear or from the possibility that this strange, impossible situation had become something neither of them had planned for. Dorothy reached out and took both their hands, placing them together. "Then promise me something," she said, her voice weak but urgent. "Promise me you'll take care of each other. Promise me this love won't be wasted." "We promise, Grandma," Maya said, her voice breaking. Alexander's hand tightened around hers. "We promise." Dorothy closed her eyes, peaceful and content. And Maya sat there, holding hands with a man who was supposed to be pretending, wondering when exactly the pretending had stopped feeling like a lie. Dorothy passed away 3 days after the wedding ceremony. It happened quietly, peacefully, in the early morning hours. Maya was holding one of her hands, Alexander the other. They'd both been dozing in their chairs when Dorothy squeezed their hands one last time, took a soft breath, and simply didn't take another. Maya knew it was coming. She'd seen enough deaths in her years as a nurse to recognize the signs. But knowing didn't make it hurt any less. When the monitors flatlined and the nurses came rushing in, Maya couldn't move. She just sat there, still holding Dorothy's hand, feeling the warmth slowly fade from her grandmother's skin. Alexander was the one who held her when she finally broke down. He was the one who made the phone calls she couldn't make, who handled the doctors and the paperwork, while Maya sat in that chair, unable to do anything but cry. This man, who'd been a stranger less than a week ago, became her anchor in the worst moment of her life. The next few days passed in a blur. There were so many decisions to make, so many details to handle. Maya had a little bit of money saved, enough for a basic funeral. But when she started making arrangements at the funeral home, the director told her everything had already been paid for. "Mr. Stone took care of it," the director said gently. "He said to give Mrs. Dorothy Richardson the best we have." Maya found Alexander sitting in the funeral home's parking lot, making business calls in his car. She knocked on his window, and when he looked up, she saw the exhaustion on his face. He'd barely left her side in 3 days. He rolled down the window. "Hey, did you pick out the flowers?" "You paid for everything," Maya said. "Alexander, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do it." He got out of the car and leaned against it. Dorothy was an incredible woman who raised an incredible person. She deserves to be honored properly. "This isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not, but I want to do it anyway." He looked at her steadily. "Let me do this, Maya, please." The funeral was beautiful. The small church in Dorothy's neighborhood was packed with people whose lives she'd touched. Former students from her years as a teacher, neighbors she'd helped, people from the community center where she'd volunteered every Saturday for 40 years. Maya had no idea her grandmother knew so many people. Alexander sat beside her in the front pew, his hand holding hers throughout the service. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she could barely get through it. She talked about Dorothy's strength, her kindness, her endless capacity for love. She talked about being 7 years old and thinking her world had ended, and how Dorothy had put it back together piece by piece. "She taught me that love isn't about grand gestures," Maya said, her voice shaking. "It's about showing up every day. It's about sacrifice and patience and never giving up on the people who matter most." She looked at Alexander without meaning to. "She taught me what it means to truly care about another person." After the service, people came up to offer condolences. Many of them mentioned the wedding, saying how happy they were that Dorothy got to see Maya settled. An older woman named Mrs. Chun, Dorothy's best friend, hugged Maya tight. "Your grandmother was so proud of you," Mrs. Chun whispered, "and so happy about Alexander. She told me she knew there was something real between you two, even if you hadn't figured it out yet." She pulled back and looked at Maya knowingly. Dorothy was always good at seeing the truth. That night, back at Maya's small apartment, Alexander helped her sort through Dorothy's things. They worked mostly in silence, folding clothes, organizing papers, boxing up a lifetime of memories. Around midnight, Maya found a letter addressed to her in Dorothy's handwriting. Her hands shook as she opened it. Alexander moved to give her privacy, but she asked him to stay. She needed him there. That realization should have scared her, but she was too tired and sad to think about what it meant. The letter was short. Dorothy had written it weeks ago, back when she could still hold a pen steady. In it, she thanked Maya for the sacrifice she'd made, for giving up medical school to take care of her. She said she was sorry for being a burden, though Maya knew she never was. And at the end, she wrote something that made Maya's breath catch. That young man you brought to see me, the one you're pretending with, he's not pretending maybe, and neither are you. When you're ready to stop being scared, I think you'll see that what started as an act of kindness became something real. Don't let it slip away. Some people spend their whole lives looking for what I saw between you two in just a few days. Hold on to it. Maya read it twice, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, Alexander was watching her with an expression that made her heart ache. "What did she say?" he asked quietly. Before Maya could answer, Alexander's phone rang. He glanced at it, and his expression changed. "I'm sorry. I have to take this." He stepped into the hallway, but Maya could hear pieces of the conversation. Something about investors. Something about a crisis. Something about needing to come back immediately. When he came back inside, his face was tight with stress. "There's a problem with the merger. I have to go back to New York tonight." "Of course," Maya said, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. "You've already stayed longer than you should have. Your real life is waiting for you." "Maya, it's okay, Alexander, really. You did more than I ever could have asked for. You gave Dorothy peace. You gave me support when I needed it most. I'll never forget that." He stepped closer. "This doesn't have to end just because the funeral is over." But before Maya could respond, his phone rang again, and then again. The business world was pulling him back, and they both knew it. Alexander left at 3 a.m, catching a red-eye flight. He hugged Maya at her door, and for a long moment, neither of them let go. "I'll call you," he promised. "You don't have to," Maya said. "We both know this was always temporary. You have your life. I have mine. They don't really fit together." "Maya, thank you, Alexander, for everything, really." She closed the door before he could say anything else, before she could change her mind, before she could admit that Dorothy had been right, that somewhere in the past week, pretending had become real, and now she was losing something she never thought she wanted. 3 days later, Maya was back at work, trying to lose herself in her nursing shifts. That's when Alexander's assistant called. The man's voice was professional and cold, nothing like Alexander's warmth. "Mr. Stone asked me to inform you that certain complications have arisen regarding your arrangement," the assistant said. "His former fiancée, Victoria Ashford, has discovered your marriage certificate and is threatening to expose it as a fraud to the media. This could damage Mr. Stone's reputation during a crucial business merger and potentially affect your nursing license, given that the deception took place in a medical facility." Maya felt sick. What does he want me to do? "Mr. Stone will handle the situation. He wanted you to know that he takes full responsibility and will ensure you face no professional consequences. However, he thinks it's best if you two have no further contact during this sensitive time. For your protection. For her protection." That's what it came down to. She'd pulled him into her messy life, and now he was dealing with the consequences while pushing her away to keep her safe. "Please tell Mr. Stone I understand," Maya said quietly, "and tell him I'm sorry. For everything." She hung up and sat in her small living room, surrounded by boxes of Dorothy's things she hadn't unpacked yet. The apartment felt impossibly empty. For one strange, beautiful week, she hadn't been alone. She'd had Alexander, his steady presence, his unexpected kindness, the way he'd made her feel seen and valued in ways she'd forgotten were possible. But that was over now. He was back in his world of billion-dollar mergers and ex-fiancés and media scandals. She was back in her world of hospital shifts and student loan debt and a grief so deep she didn't know how to climb out of it. Maya picked up the photo from the hospital wedding. The photographer had rushed the prints at Alexander's request. In the picture, they were standing beside Dorothy's bed, holding hands, looking at each other with expressions that didn't look fake at all. They looked like two people who'd found something unexpected and precious. Mrs. Chun's words echoed in her mind. Dorothy was always good at seeing the truth. Maya set the photo down and let herself cry. Not just for Dorothy this time, but for Alexander, for what they'd had and what they'd lost, for a connection that had been real, but couldn't survive in the harsh light of their actual lives. Somewhere in New York, Alexander was probably in a boardroom right now, making million-dollar decisions, being the powerful businessman everyone expected him to be. He'd forget about the nurse who'd stopped him outside a hotel. He'd move on with his real life. And Maya would do the same. She'd go back to her shifts, figure out how to live without Dorothy, maybe eventually think about medical school again. She'd survive, because that's what she did. But late at night, in that quiet moment before sleep, she'd remember what it felt like to not be alone. She'd remember the man who'd pretended to be her husband and somehow became more real than anything else in her life. She'd remember, and she'd wonder if he was remembering too. 3 weeks passed like walking through fog. Maya went to work, came home, ate when she remembered to, and stared at the walls of her apartment. She'd finally unpacked Dorothy's things, arranging her grandmother's favorite books on the shelf, hanging her photographs on the walls. The apartment felt full of memories, but empty of life. She hadn't heard from Alexander. Not a text, not a call, nothing. His assistant had sent official papers about the marriage certificate being quietly dissolved, handled through lawyers so it wouldn't raise any questions. Everything was being taken care of, neat and clean, like it had never happened at all. Except it had happened. And Maya couldn't forget it, no matter how hard she tried. She'd pick up her phone a dozen times a day, wanting to call him, wanting to know if he was okay, if the merger went through, if Victoria had backed down from her threats. But every time, she'd remember his assistant's cold voice saying Alexander thought it was best they had no contact. For her protection, so she didn't call. She just went to work and tried to remember who she'd been before a desperate plea outside a hotel had changed everything. Meanwhile, in New York, Alexander sat in yet another board meeting and realized he couldn't remember a single word anyone had said for the past 20 minutes. Around him, executives were presenting quarterly reports, discussing projections, debating strategies. The merger with TechVision had gone through successfully. His company's stock was at an all-time high. He'd made his investors $3 billion richer, and he felt absolutely nothing. Mr. Stone, your thoughts on the expansion proposal? Alexander looked at the faces around the conference table. These people had been part of his life for years. Some of them he'd call friends, though he realized now he didn't actually know any of their personal stories. He didn't know who had children, or what they dreamed about, or what made them laugh. He'd spent 15 years building this empire, and somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten to build a life. He stood up. Everyone stared at him. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't do this anymore." His chief operating officer blinked. "Can't do what?" "The expansion? Any of this. I'm done." Alexander grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. "Handle the expansion however you think best. You have full authority. Mr. Stone, are you feeling all right?" Someone asked. Actually, for the first time in years, I think I might be. Alexander walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I've spent my whole life in rooms like this, making decisions that don't matter, earning money I don't need, impressing people I don't care about. And 3 weeks ago, I met someone who reminded me what it feels like to be alive, what it feels like to matter to another human being. And I walked away from that because of what? Business? Reputation? None of that means anything. He left the conference room without waiting for a response. His assistant tried to follow him, calling out about appointments and commitments, but Alexander kept walking. He walked right out of the building, got in his car, and drove straight to the airport. 4 hours later, he was landing in Maya's city. He didn't call ahead. He didn't make a plan. He just knew he needed to see her, to tell her that the past 3 weeks had been the longest of his life, to ask if maybe what they'd started could be something real. He went to her apartment first, but she wasn't there. Then he remembered what his assistant had told him. Maya had picked up extra shifts at the hospice ward. She'd requested to work there specifically, helping families through those final difficult days with their loved ones. Alexander found her in the hospice lounge, sitting with an elderly man who was crying quietly. She was holding his hand, speaking softly, her presence radiating the same compassion and strength he'd seen when she cared for Dorothy. She was telling the man that his wife knew he loved her, that it was okay to be scared. That grief was just love with nowhere to go. Alexander stood in the doorway and watched her. This woman who'd stumbled into his life and turned everything upside down. She was wearing scrubs, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, exhausted from another double shift. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When Maya finally looked up and saw him standing there, the color drained from her face. The elderly man patted her hand and shuffled away, giving them privacy with a knowing look. "What are you doing here?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander walked into the room. "I walked out of a board meeting today. Just stood up and left." "Why?" "Because I was sitting there talking about profit margins and market shares, and all I could think about was you. About how you made me feel more in 1 week than I've felt in 15 years. About how going back to my old life after knowing you felt like trying to breathe underwater." Maya shook her head, standing up. "Alexander, we can't do this. Your ex-fiancé, the media attention, are different worlds. I don't care about any of that." He moved closer. Victoria backed down. "The merger is done. My company is fine. Everything I was worried about has been handled. But none of it matters, Maya. None of it means anything without you." "You barely know me," Maya said, but her voice was shaking. "I know you gave up your dreams for someone you loved. I know you're strong and compassionate, and real in a way no one in my life has ever been. I know that when I'm with you, I'm the person I always wanted to be, but didn't know how." He took her hands. "I know that what we had wasn't just pretend. Dorothy knew it. I think you know it too." Tears were streaming down Maya's face now. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When you left, when your assistant called, I thought I'd imagined all of it. That maybe I'd just been lonely and grieving and confused. You didn't imagine it. I've been miserable without you. I tried to convince myself I was protecting you by staying away, but really, I was just protecting myself from getting hurt again, from trusting someone enough to let them matter." He squeezed her hands. "But I don't want to live like that anymore. I want to take the risk. I want to choose you every single day, for real this time." Maya looked up at him, and Alexander saw hope fighting with fear in her eyes. "What if it doesn't work? What if we're too different? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what people who love each other do, right? They work through the hard stuff." He smiled softly. "You taught me that. You and Dorothy." "She knew," Maya said. "She left me a letter. She said she could see it was real between us, even when we were still pretending. Dorothy was a wise woman. Maya laughed through her tears. She really was. Then her expression grew serious. I kept the wedding certificate. I know we had it legally dissolved, but I kept the original one from the hospital. Is that crazy? I kept the photos, Alexander admitted. All of them. I look at them every night. They stood there in the hospice lounge, surrounded by the reality of life's fragility, holding hands just like they had beside Dorothy's bed. And Maya made a choice. She chose to believe in something real. She chose to take the risk. She chose him. Okay, she said softly. Let's try. For real this time. Alexander pulled her close, and Maya let herself be held. For the first time since Dorothy died, she didn't feel alone. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt like he'd finally come home. 6 months later, they stood in the community center where Dorothy had volunteered every Saturday for 40 years. This time, the wedding wasn't in a hospital room with machines beeping in the background. It was surrounded by people who mattered, Maya's friends from work, neighbors from Dorothy's old building, kids Dorothy had tutored who were adults now, and even some of Alexander's employees who'd become real friends over the past months. Maya wore a simple white dress. Alexander wore a suit but no tie, because Maya said he looked happier without one. The ceremony was performed by the same chaplain from the hospital, who cried happy tears this time. When Alexander said his vows, he talked about a desperate woman outside a hotel who'd asked him for an impossible favor. He talked about learning what love really meant by watching her care for her grandmother. He talked about choosing her every day for the rest of his life. When Maya said her vows, she talked about a stranger who'd shown up when she needed him most. She talked about how he'd honored Dorothy's memory and helped her survive her grief. She talked about choosing bravery over fear and love over loneliness. After the ceremony, they drove to the cemetery where Dorothy was buried. Maya laid her bouquet on the grave, while Alexander stood beside her, his hand in hers. She'd be so happy, Maya said softly. She always wanted me to find someone who saw me for who I really am. She'd be proud of you for going back to medical school too, Alexander said. Because Maya had enrolled again, finally pursuing the dream she'd put on hold. Alexander had offered to pay for it, but Maya insisted on taking out loans. They'd compromised. He'd paid for Dorothy's memorial scholarship, fund that would help other students in Maya's situation. And Maya accepted his support in other ways. The foundation had launched last month. The Dorothy Richardson Memorial Fund provided financial assistance to families dealing with hospice care expenses. It had already helped 50 families. Alexander ran it personally, finding more fulfillment in that work than he'd ever found in tech acquisitions. Do you ever miss your old life? Maya asked as they walked back to the car. The power meetings, the big deals, the simple life? Alexander thought about it. He still ran his company, but he delegated more, worked from home often, made time for things that mattered. His old colleagues thought he'd lost his edge. His investors worried he'd gone soft. He didn't care. I don't miss the life, he said. I miss who I thought I was supposed to be. But I like who I actually am so much better. Maya smiled and leaned against him. Me too. As they drove away from the cemetery, the late afternoon sun painting everything gold, Alexander reached over and took Maya's hand. She squeezed back, and he thought about how one desperate plea had changed everything. How saying yes to a stranger had led him here, to this moment, to this life. To her. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For stopping me that day. For asking me for something impossible. For giving me a reason to be better. Maya lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles. Thank you for saying yes. And somewhere, Alexander liked to think, Dorothy was smiling. The woman who'd spent her life teaching others about love had given them One final gift, she'd shown them how to find it in the most unexpected place, in each other.